Hi everyone, this is my review for Undaunted North Africa, published by Osprey Games from David Thompson and Trevor Benjamin. This game is really focusing in on the long range desert group and the Italians in North Africa. It's the second game in the series, the first one being around Normandy. I've played both. The Normandy game was in my top war games of 2019. So let's see how this one holds up compared. So first up, the rulebook. The rulebook is incredibly well written. This is a pretty straightforward game. It's unusual. I think it's the only real sort of style of game like this for a war game. Predominantly because it's so card driven and so not hex driven, for want of a better expression. As you can see on this page here, really the game is the board is a series of square tiles that you put together for the scenario, and you move from one tile to the other, and all the actions that you do as a player are driven by the cards, and you draft in new cards and so forth. And I'll talk a little bit more about that when we come to look at the gameplay. But the rule book is incredibly well written. It's very diligent in that it takes you through each of the core components, each of the key mechanics at a good pace. And it's probably one of the best examples, I think, of a rule book where it's very, very, very clear what how the mechanics of the game work. Even if once you've learned the game, which I'll be honest with you, just skim through, read through the rule book, put some tiles out, do some movement, do some combat with the cards. You learn how to use the cards, and you'll be away. And even if you put the game away and come back to it sometime later, a quick skim through the rule book will remind you how to play. And when you're playing, if you're not sure how a specific thing works, you simply just go back to the rule book and you'll find it really quickly. Beautifully done, full colour, loads of great examples of play. So it's very clear. I had no problem understanding the rules in this series of games at all. This game has a few things that are different than Normandy. I'll talk about those. But those differences again were very clear to me. So even coming to it, having played Undaunted Normandy quite a lot, I had no problem whatsoever. So yeah, great job. So next up we have the scenario book, and again this is very clear, very well written. It tells you the tiles that you're going to be using for the scenario. They also have a handy list of the tiles at the bottom. Shows how you're going to make up the two decks. And I'll talk a little bit about the decks and the cards later on. You get a ton of scenarios in this game. I have played nearly all of them. Some of them have specific vehicles, and this game one of the differences between this game and the previous game is the use of vehicles in the game. As you can see, some of the scenarios are use more tiles than some of the others, different shapes, and the scenarios, whilst they're not specific historic recreations, they're very inspired by the history of this period, which is great. Certainly from my point of view, for someone who plays a lot of historical games and is particularly interested in many elements of history, there was enough in this game for me. It feels authentic enough, very much so. And it's one of the things I like about this game is because it's focusing on a period of history, and a real tight focus on this particular piece, and that I don't have too many games on. This was a great scenario. I love this one. And you get tons and tons of them, as you can see. So you got 11 scenarios. You can also play them in a sort of a campaign as well, which I very much enjoyed. And it tells you how to do the campaign. So, for example, very well written, as was the rule book, very well laid out. It's very clear. Had no problems whatsoever with any of this. I thought it was excellent piece of work. So next up, components. I've got an example of one of the scenarios laid out here. The tiles fit together sort of really nicely. The artwork is awesome on the tiles. It's a really nice tone and palette, beautifully done. Same for the artwork of the cards. The counters are nice and chunky, very hard wearing. I've played this game umpteen times now with all the different scenarios. The card art is great. Really nice illustrations. They shuffle really nice. It's a high quality game. All the components are beautifully done, and very clear. Again, the contents of the tiles are very clear. The numbering, the defensive bonus the tiles give you, the information on the actual counters themselves is very clear. So absolutely, yeah, it's great, and it looks fantastic when you've got it on the board. So yeah, great job. So I'm just going to talk a bit about the mechanics. Effectively, the best way to describe this game really is it's more like a card drafting game. And I will be honest, I don't have a lot of card drafting games. I normally, play a lot of war games and a lot of hex and counter or area sort of based war games or solitaire narrative war games. So I'm no expert on card drafting games by any stretch of the imagination. Effectively, you have a number of cards that you play every turn. You take them from a smaller deck that's taken from a larger deck, effectively. And these cards enable you to perform the actions that you'd want your counters on the board to do. So if you want to attack, for example, this machine gunner here would enable the machine gunner over there to attack, because he's got an attack command on the opponent. And those cards enable you to move around. They enable you to take more cards and move them from deck to deck, which you're going to be pulling from, which is really a key part of the game. And then you have these horrible fog of war cards that are completely useless. They don't do anything. They give you a hindrance, and you'll be taking cards and putting them into your hand, and you'll be, especially as the game progresses, you'll be bet your bottom dollar. You'll be taking more and more of those as you expand your territory and sort of scout out new areas. And effectively, the game is completely card driven. You use cards to drive every single action that you'd want to do in the game. You can't do something unless you have a card that enables that specific counter to do that specific thing. The vehicles had a nice dynamic. So within the vehicles, you've got soldiers who can drive the vehicles around, or go into new areas, or attack the opponent, for example. And obviously, that's very relevant to this period of history with the long-range desert patrol in North Africa, and it just plays effortlessly. What I like about the game is a few things. One is that, as I said, I'm not used to this type of gameplay mechanic. You don't see this very often in war games, for sure. There are war games that are you use cards, but not like this. It's what I liked about Normandy. It's what I like about this game as well. I think the other thing that's really good about the game is that it's very, very welcoming to new players. You don't need to know anything about this period of history. It's easy to teach someone new to it. I've played this with my kids, for example, and they got it straight away, and we had a lot of fun playing together. The cards, because they drive everything in the game, that's an easy concept to understand, but at the same time there's a great depth of strategy to it, in working out how to best control your different decks, I'll call it, to help you, and how to best use the cards that you're given, I would say, which is a lot of fun, and there's a great sort of decision making process in doing so. It is a brilliant two-player game. I've played it solo quite a few times as well, predominantly because it doesn't take very long to play either. So you can set up and play this game in maybe just a little over half an hour, I would say. So it has that kind of light game that has those elements of decision making, and the narrative that plays out when playing it solo is pretty good. There isn't a specific solo mode for the game yet. I believe there's going to be one coming out in an expansion, and people have had a go at doing their own. I kind of used some of that and a bit of my own making to play it solo, and I find it solos quite well. And it has a rich narrative that comes out, predominantly because you're pulling cards and you don't know what options you've got until you've taken the cards. It's not a game where you can do everything that you'd want to do when it's your turn. It just doesn't work that way. You're limited to the cards, but you can help yourself by moving the cards from supply to the deck, for example. Component wise, it's brilliant, very clear, very easy to understand. It's a great fun game, which is probably how I best would describe it. It's just brilliantly fun. Seeing the look on your opponent's face when he didn't quite get the cards that he wanted to do or she wanted to do. All the dice mechanics are straightforward. Combat is easy, straightforward. It's not a particularly brutal combat. You're generally speaking, your counters can take quite a few hits before they're knocked out of the game, and that makes it a lot of fun for new players. I would say so. The game gives you lots of chances, I would say. I loved Undaunted Normandy. I actually slightly preferred this one, I'll be honest with you. I think mostly because of the setting. I love the setting. It's more unique. I don't have many games with this particular setting focused on the long range desert patrol. You don't need to know anything about that history to be able to enjoy the game, I'll be honest with you. But for me, that's a real boon and a bonus, and I love that about it. I love Normandy as well, and I'll happily play both these games in an evening, no problem at all. Play them solo or play them with friends and family. It's not a game that's going to ever replace Hex, Counter, Squad level games. It's not meant to do that. It's meant to be, I think, a fun, engaging game that makes you think. That is a challenge with another player, with an emphasis on that sort of making key strategic decisions, but in a really fun, easy to understand, easy to grasp way. So yeah, enjoy the game greatly. If you've played the first game and you enjoyed it, get this. It's more and of a different setting and a few interesting mechanics like the vehicles. There's a few other things. That's well worth it for that alone. If you're unfamiliar with this series of games, do yourself a favour and try them out. They are a lot of fun and fit nicely, I think, into someone's wargame collection because they're so different. There's nothing. I have never played anything like it, and I can't think of another game with this sort of rich historical setting that's so easy for new people to grasp. I think it's good as a introductory war game, but I would say because it's not hex based and so forth, it's kind of its own unique thing, which I think is brilliant and incredibly enjoyable. So yeah, thanks for watching. Highly recommended. Another great game in the series. I'll happily play this and I'll happily buy every game in the series, I think. So yeah, great stuff. Thank you.